You can now be a queer kid in a rural place where you don't know anybody queer, and you can have an online community that makes you feel as unalone as you've ever felt in your life. And that is absolutely life-saving. I can't think of anything more important that the internet could be doing. But they know that the brain chemistry, when you release dopamine, when you release oxytocin, all the reward system is really geared towards in-person relationships.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. Today's episode is all about social skills, but from an updated lens that really speaks to the lived experience of today's kids. My guest is writer and journalist Catherine Newman, and we're going to dive into her new book, What Can I Say? A Kid's Guide to Super Useful Social Skills to Help You Get Along and Express Yourself. What Can I Say is aimed at kids ages 10 and up, and it includes practical and accessible advice to help kids and teens learn how to do everything from introduce themselves, express empathy, be persuasive, and apologize, to compromise, ask for help, be grateful, and comfort a friend. In this conversation, Catherine and I talk about why social and interpersonal skills are more important than ever for our kids, despite the fact that their lives are evolving to include more time spent online. We also talk about the climate for social-emotional learning and ways parents and educators can reinforce the social skills our kids are learning. And a little bit more about Catherine. In addition to the book we're talking about today, Catherine is the author of the memoirs Catastrophic Happiness and Waiting for Birdie, the middle grade novel One Mixed Up Night, the kids' craft book Stitch Camp, and the how-to book for kids, How to Be a Person. She edits the nonprofit kids cooking magazine Chop Chop, writes the etiquette column for Real Simple magazine, and is a regular contributor to the New York Times, O, the Oprah magazine, Parents magazine, Cup of Joe, and many other publications. Before I get to my conversation with Catherine, I do want to give a quick shout out to Sarah Holzman, Shelley Sullivan, and Martina, 3 new supporters of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining my Patreon campaign and helping me cover the costs of producing this show. If you get a lot out of this podcast and want to join Sarah, Shelley, and Martina in supporting it, you can sign up at Patreon to make a small monthly contribution. To learn more, visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Thanks so much. And now here is my conversation with Catherine. Hey, Catherine, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Debbie. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to be having this conversation. And we were just saying, we both feel like we know each other, yet this is our first actual conversation. So I'm really excited just getting to have this chat with you and sharing you with my audience.
I'm so excited to get to talk to you.
Well, can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself? From the bio that I read in the intro, it's clear that you are a multi-passionate person. And you do lots of things in lots of different spaces, which I love. That really resonated with me. I'd love to just hear in your voice, like kind of a little bit about what you do in the world. And then as part of that, how writing these nonfiction books for kids became part of your body of work.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's I love multi-passionate. I just wrote that down so that I can have it tattooed onto my wrist because that's such a polite way to describe what I do. I have been a writer in some ways for my whole life, but I had a long divergent path through grad school. I actually got a PhD in literature in the 1990s. And then we had a baby. We were living in a friend's room, a friend's house, one room in a friend's house, my partner and I, with a baby, both of us trying to finish PhDs. And we thought, what are we doing? Moved from California back to the East Coast. And so then neither of us actually wanted to be academics. And so both of us finished our PhDs. And then my husband went to massage school. He is a massage therapist. And I wound up writing kind of full-time as a freelancer. So that has looked like writing copy for Kotex that's like, don't worry, you had a baby, the tampon won't fall out. That kind of like terrible work. I've written so many different things for so many different people. But along the way, I got hired by Baby Center. And you just have to picture, this is back in the early 2000s. I had not heard the word blog. And I got written to write a weekly column about my kids. And that really launched my career as a writer, even though they paid me $50 a week for a 750 word column. If you're not a writer, that's really bad money, just heads up. But it became a memoir. It became another column that also became a memoir. And then I was really a writer, and then there's others. I know you're looking at the bio like, what about the food writing? What about the etiquette column? I do all kinds of other work and writing too. I love cooking. I loved feeding my kids. I have to put that in the past tense because they are both in college now, but I still love feeding them, even though it was totally relentless. Side note, dinner every single night. You're like, seriously, again with the dinner? But it turned out everybody needed to eat every single evening while they were growing up, which was baffling to me. But I wrote a lot of recipes. I've been the Real Simple Etiquette columnist for 10 years, even though I have like horrible table manners and never had a wedding. Like, I'm so not a traditional etiquette person, but I love to think about relationships. And that is why I ended up writing the book, which is why I'm with you today. The What Can I Say book for kids is really, in many ways, an etiquette book, but not etiquette in the, tea with the queen way, but etiquette in the sense of how do we make our relationships, how do we treat them as primary and make them as strong as they can be, because they are our greatest asset. There, I monologued. Sorry.
No, it was great. You took us on a journey and we ended up right where we want to be, which is great. And I just have to say, too, with this book, and you wrote another book in a similar vein called How to Be a Person for Kids. It's a totally different thing to write a book for kids of, what's the age group for these books? How do you identify it?
Well, it really depends on, what they say is sort of based on a unspoken idea of like a neurotypical kid. So that we say like 10 to 14 for both of these books. That said, it can skew younger or older depending on who your kid is. We feel like we know that young adults are using the first book, How to Be a Person, which has a lot of life skills in it. And we know that that's a useful kind of backup for kids who've done a lot of occupational therapy, who are just needing like a little reference, And What Can I Say, I would think would have a similar range, but it just came out yesterday, so we're not totally sure yet who's reading it.
Well, yeah. And it's for this audience, I think you really nailed it just in terms of the tone and the accessibility. It's bite-sized. There aren't a lot of words in it, but every word matters so much. Like, you cover so much ground in this book. I was delighted. Like, every time I turned the page, I'm like, and this. So,
I'm so glad. That makes me so happy. I haven't gotten a ton of feedback on it yet because it's just coming out.
Yeah, no, I just feel like it's so important, and you really covered so many things, and I want to get into a lot of what you share in the book. But I guess before we get into that, it's What Can I Say? A Kid's Guide to Super Useful Social Skills to Help You Get Along and Express Yourself. So why now? Can you just kind of talk about this book in the context of where we are in the world and why this book is so necessary?
Yes. There are so many answers to that question. One answer is the pandemic. These are evergreen skills anyways. There have been people talking about this stuff forever. But in this, I used to say post-pandemic, and now obviously it's evolving pandemic. I don't know what to say anymore. In this world where kids have been in and out of their normal social lives over the last couple of years, they've been in school, not in school, over Zoom. A lot of kids have dug deep into their phones. They are on social media a lot. And people talk a lot right now about feeling like their kids are not very fluent in their social relationships. I think that's true of a lot of adults too, by the way. It's just harder to teach adult stuff because adults don't tend to want to be taught anything. But kids are open, I think, to I think if you present these skills as learnable skills, kids will learn them instead of somehow presuming that these are skills that are in the air kids are breathing, which of course they're not. And then the other thing I say, so besides the pandemic, besides that you and I are speaking soon after a horrific Texas school shooting, where we are just thinking all the time about what is missing from everybody's life besides gun control laws. And then if you think of this, I'm so struck by the way that something as vast as foreign policy is an extension of social skills. If you think social skills at bottom, they're dealing with the fact that other people are different from you. That's kind of it. If everyone was the same as you would need no skills. They would just be exactly like you and you could just do whatever. People are different. That's a beautiful thing. And then what you do with that fact is really up to you. So if you think about like war over differences, that kind of thing, this is basically a huge version of how do we get along with other people? How do we turn somebody's difference into an asset instead of a liability?
Yes. So as you were responding, I was thinking about, well, first of all, I've heard so much about kids these days who have, as you said, spent the past couple of years really immersed in their devices. Their social relationships have really played out online, and they may have gained skills with that kind of communication. But even those same kids, put them in a room together, it will be crickets. Like they don't know how to engage with each other. And I'm wondering if you're noticing that. And I just wondered too, I feel like I've heard pushback from people who've said, you know what, that's where we are evolving, and kids, their lives are going to be played out on their devices, and we don't need to fight that as much. So what would you say in response to people who maybe feel that these types of interpersonal, like in real life social skills don't matter as much?
So I feel strongly that they do. And, there's evidence that they matter. People who study depression and anxiety and how it relates to loneliness as defined as not in actual human real life contact with people. My daughter, who deals with like anxiety and is on TikTok all the time, and it is a lifesaver. It is so great. Like people are doing brilliant things online. So I'm not just globally dissing that. That's so important. You can now be a queer kid in a rural place where you don't know anybody queer, and you can have an online community that makes you feel as unalone as you've ever felt in your life. And that is absolutely life-saving. I can't think of anything more important that the internet could be doing. But they know that the brain chemistry, when you release dopamine, when you release oxytocin, all the reward system is really geared towards in-person relationships. So, and that's true. I love to say this. That's true even for introverts. So I'm an introvert. I'm whatever. I've been diagnosed as like an outgoing introvert, whatever. Even for me, what makes me feel good is human interaction. Do I need to then like go lie down with the cats for 5 hours? Yeah, maybe. But what is protective of our mental health, what is in fact the thing that gives us the will to live, is in-person human interaction. And I think that's a worthwhile thing to actually explain to kids, to be honest, like just be transparent about it, because there is science to support that. It is a fact.
And I think, my hunch is that this is something most kids want. A lot of kids, especially, this is an area where a lot of neurodivergent kids struggle anyway, right? Is socially relating to other people, understanding how to navigate social situations, not, as you say, this isn't in the water or in the air. Like a lot of times social cues are things that differently wired kids may just not be good at in the first place. So I think that's what I so appreciated, the nuances that your book went into. And I'd love to talk about some of them.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words, straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. A lot of what you share is about emotional regulation, really. How to be angry, how to forgive, how to express empathy. Can you say more about how you kind of identified the things that you wanted to include in here? Because it is so comprehensive.
Thank you for that question, which is a great question. It was a very multi-pronged approach. We did a lot of crowdsourcing. We got a lot of feedback from kids about the first book. The thing kids most wanted that the first book didn't include, almost everything, was social skills. Kids wrote us letters that were like, but how do I make small talk with my grandma? And how do I ask someone out on a date? And we thought, oh yeah, this is going to be another book where we just dig deep with social skills. And then because I've written that Real Simple column for so long, the truth is adults are dealing with really similar stuff. So when I distilled, at some point I distilled basically all of the major kind of themes and questions of 10 years of that column. And it's a lot of stuff that's in this book for kids. How do you deal with being excluded? How do you extend to someone when you're not feeling necessarily generous? How do you say no? How do you, all of the skills in this book, how do you keep recentering yourself around empathy, which I think is probably, if there's one global suggestion, it's that, to keep trying to imagine what it feels like to be somebody else. And that's a really hard thing. And I know there's controversy about whether or not empathy can be taught. but we know it can be taught to some extent, and that it is a skill that takes practice of imagining what it feels like to be somebody else. If somebody smiles at you and you smile back, you're practicing empathy already. I feel like it's a good thing to remind kids. They actually already know what it is. But then we had to deal with a lot of nuance that I didn't really know about. And I had to learn really fast, like at some point, and you'll laugh because like, this is so ignorant of me. But at some point I had said like, oh, it's really important when you're meeting somebody to make eye contact with them. And one of our beta readers who was reading for accessibility was like, yeah, lots of people can't do that. Like that can't be a prerequisite for meeting somebody. We were able to fine tune to accommodate kind of much subtler questions of personhood than we had started with. So to make eye contact if you can, to try again to make eye contact, even if you think of it as something you can't do. And if you can't do it, you can't do it. That's fine. You have plenty of other things to offer we just didn't want it to feel like a book where you would think, ugh, shoot, this is not a book for me because I know I can't do this thing.
Yeah, I noticed that in the eye contact. I was like, if you can, like it felt very inclusive to me because, of course, as a parent of a neurodivergent kid, I'm always reading everything through a lens of, okay, but does this work for my family? And it did feel very inclusive in that way. So well done on that. And that's awesome. I took notes, like, of course, everything, as I said, every time I turned the page, I was like, yes. Oh, interesting. It covered so many things. I loved the inclusivity, how to be an ally. You include how to react to a racist joke, which I thought was wonderful, how to talk about pronouns. Can you talk about some of those issues that are more centered around identity and issues that could be considered tricky right now certainly for a lot of adults to handle?
Yeah, yes. And as I'm sure you can imagine, these were the parts of this book that the most people had the most comments about. So we hired different sensitivity readers at Story. We hired a Black writer and thinker to read the book through the lens of both potential racist assumptions in the book and also potential opportunities. And we had a wheelchair user read the book for sensitivity to ability and disability and body differences. And I really had to practice some of the skills in this book of reminding myself to be grateful instead of defensive, for example. I got a ton of feedback and it was really vital to me and I treasured it. And also it's really hard to be criticized. So that was just an interesting process. And, I'm always so grateful to have those experiences where I experience a social interaction as challenging because you learn so much from that. You can really expand into that. Anyway, we assume there, maybe will be some pushback out in the world about some of these issues. I'm not really sure yet, or people thinking these aren't really kids' issues, but of course they really are. We are seeing kids kind of give up the gender binary all over the country right now. That is just a fact. Kids are no longer always comfortably identifying as a boy or a girl. Kids are either experimenting with gender or fully deviating from the gender they were assigned at birth. So all of these things, they are real issues and they are in our kids' lives. Our kids are, as far as I can tell, our kids are handling it with much more grace than the adults are, by and large. So I'm learning a ton from young people. And then there are things like how to respond to a racist joke. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do, as anyone who's ever done it knows. I have done it. And as an adult, it makes me so sweaty and nervous. And I'm pretty good at responding to stuff. And so we have a lot of caveats about like, if you feel safe, and this is really hard, but it's also really important for people, and especially white people in this moment, to start seeing themselves to start using that power for the good of our whole society. So to just start, even if you read that and you don't practice it, that it's in your head with some scripts you could use. We were really trying to be practical, not just aspirational, like, wouldn't it be great if you could respond to this? But like, what could you actually say if this happens in front of you? So anyway, some of these things are going to be too hard for some kids, and that's fine. That's why we keep saying, if you can't do it, that's okay, and make sure you're safe above all. But also it's okay if it just sneaks into your head as like this is maybe something I'm going to try at some point.
Yeah, I love that it's so practical. And as I was reading it too, I was thinking this is a book, especially again, for those of us raising differently wired kids, that we may like read with our kid. We may practice some of those scenarios and do some role playing to use some of those strategies and see how it feels like, because they're hard to do. If you're in an awkward situation, how do you leave it? How do you handle this?
Right. Yes. And when you say that, I'm thinking too about the fact that like neurodivergent kids who've done like a lot of OT, interestingly, often have a much easier relationship to learning social skills because they've already been aware of learning them. And that's just an interesting thing. Like if you like neurotypical kids don't always have experiences of being taught these skills, which often means they haven't actually learned them or practiced them. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Like my kids, neither of whom identifies as neurodivergent, but we were going to a funeral 2 years ago. And these kids, so my kids are 22 and 19. And in the car, they were like, can we role play offering condolences? And I was like, yes, because it is so hard. They felt so awkward and uncomfortable. They knew they needed to do it. And they felt embarrassed or like they were going to screw it up. And we practiced in the car and we talked about how it was actually fine. You didn't need to go on and on. You could just say, I'm so sorry for your loss. But like practicing skills at the way we would practice like algebra or singing, like it's just another learnable thing, as you well know. But I think for lots of parents, it feels like you should learn social and emotional skills the way you learn a language, that it's in the house and your kids just pick it up. I think being deliberate is probably a better way to go for everybody.
Yeah, especially now, knowing that our kids their social engagement looks so different than when we were their age and in high school, and kind of, I think of my high school life of like going to track practice and then hanging out to go to waiting for play rehearsal to start and just hanging out, talking to each other, right?
I know. Or like winding the long cord from the kitchen phone so you could talk privately in like the coat closet. Like I know it's so different. I totally agree that I remember childhood exactly the way you just described it.
Yeah. And I would say too, I love what you say about these kids who've been in OT. And I often say that neurodivergent kids can grow up to be some of the most kind of emotionally intelligent humans you'll meet, because they have spent time exploring and thinking about relationships with others and how they show up in the world and how they experience being in a relationship with other people.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I think that's an incredible thing and should be a source of great pride. That a lot of kids who've been in OT are basically students of human life in the way that lots of people maybe should be.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark-Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.
And just to go back to, you mentioned that you're expecting some pushback. Certainly, as I was reading this book, I was thinking, I'm curious to see what the response is from certain communities, especially right now. I've been very much kind of outraged about the attack on social emotional learning and just this idea that we don't want to be talking about things that we know are so critical. And so I don't know, do you have a game plan, or what are you thinking about in terms of this book as being part of this bigger conversation on the SEL that's happening right now, especially in the US?
I don't have a game plan. That's a great question. I'm not probably super interested in criticisms in that vein. And I don't really know. What do you think someone could say to me, like that these aren't really skills, or that people should just know this stuff?
You know, this is a whole other conversation, but okay. Especially surrounding the inclusivity, the gender, those things, that this is perpetuating ideas that we know are already, as you said, like this is the reality for our kids and their experience.
I guess maybe what I would say is just that, like, for me, none of this stuff, like, these are not controversial things. These are just phenomena that exist in the world. And so we get on board and be supportive. Like, I don't, especially, like, I'm thinking right now, saying that, I'm thinking about the gender thing. Like, whether or not anybody feels some way about it, this is just happening. Kids just are not the genders they were assigned at birth, or they are non-binary, or they don't use the pronouns you expect them to use. I mean, it's not arguable, you know, it just is a fact. And so I feel like if we raise our kids to be supportive and inclusive, then that's the way to make the world the way we want it. And the truth is, so many kids already are supportive and inclusive, and they're doing an absolutely incredible job. And in the face of really daunting odds, it's a moment where there is so much hatred. And I feel like I keep seeing kids just rise to the occasion over and over again of being brave and of being inclusive and kind. And that kills me. I feel like we have left it to them, and they're really doing it.
They are doing it. I'm wondering if you could, I don't know if you have like a favorite skill, but because your book is, again, it covers so many things, but what do you think would be, if we could focus on one area, is there one thing that you think is most critical?
I mean, oh my God, I have so many favorite skills. In my How to Be a Person book, when people ask me like what the most important skill was, and that it was like my trick answer, because that book was full of like how to do the dishes and take out the trash. And I always said my favorite skill in that book was how to apologize, which is still, I think, an incredibly useful skill. I feel like one of the skills I really think about and love to help people cultivate, and this is true in the Real Simple column as well with adults, and you're an interviewer like by trade, so probably it's hard for you to even think about the skill, but how do you cultivate curiosity in other people? So that sense of like, we want our kids to feel about other people like, I don't know. I just remember I have a metaphor in my head, and it's like being a kid and watching someone crack open a geode, and there was just this like rough gray rock, and then on the inside it was just like all glittering purple. And this feeling that if we approach other people with enough tenderness and curiosity, that we will have access to that kind of beauty. Now, that sounds very aspirational. And I realize that there's nothing in the book that quite matches that, but just that curiosity about other people is a learnable skill. You ask questions, you listen when somebody talks, you look up from your phone to indicate that you're curious and interested. So I feel like that's a weirdly kind of underrated skill or kind of way of moving through the world. But it seems to me that it's at the heart of so much. And again, just to expand it out, like if you think about things happening at a global level, if people stopped and said, wow, what's it like to be you? What is the significance of this to you? Tell me more about what you believe and why. Those are just the biggest possible ways of being, the most significant ways of moving through the world. That's a huge worldview in and of itself, just curiosity.
I love that so much. I love your geode metaphor, and I felt that. I've had that experience of people that I maybe judged initially and then discovered who they were and how powerful that can be. And I think that's such an incredible skill for our kids who, can be a little self-involved, especially if they're struggling.
Oh my God. And I love that you said that about being wrong about people, because that is one of my favorite things. I love to be wrong about people in that way. I love that. And that's coming to me, I'm 53. That's new for me, to just lean into being wrong. And to say to myself, oh my God, maybe I'm wrong. Instead of just like hanging from the mast of my opinion, through the winds of change. It's really, I just love that. Yes, to be wrong about somebody. It's so good.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before we say goodbye and wrap this up, again, we know this isn't a once and done thing, that our kids are going to read the book, they'll be good to go. We talked about role playing. Do you have any other ideas for ways we as parents and caregivers and educators can be really reinforcing and strengthening the skills in your book?
I mean, it's like so obvious that it's almost painful to say it. And I don't want to just make everybody want to lie down on the floor with tiredness about this idea. But modeling is, I think about it all the time because I can be such a horrendous hypocrite. I can be so judgmental about my kids being on their phones. And then I can be on my phone and like not greet somebody when they come in to my home. One of my kids or my husband, like that weird thing, you can feel like everything you're doing is so pressing and urgent. And so I guess just, other than like practicing with kids, but just modeling it, just like walking the talk of put your phone down, turn your phone off, which I know is insanity, but that is something I've started doing, turning it actually all the way off. So it's not just talking to me from across the room, the way you feel. So like your phone has something to share with you. Like I'm just turning it off and looking up and standing up to greet people. It sounds so, it's like embarrassing to say because like I assume most people are doing all those things, but I was in a habit of not doing that for a little while, of just, I don't know. I just feel like this feeling of like sitting up and looking up and being really present when one of my kids is talking to me. Even now, even at 22 and 19, just centering into the experience of being with them and what that models for them, which I really hope is the kind of attentiveness and caring that we want them to practice.
So good. Love that. Love that. Thank you. So, well, before we say goodbye, again, I just want to remind listeners the book is called What Can I Say? And by the time you're listening to this, it will have been out probably for about a month. The subtitle is A Kid's Guide to Super Useful Social Skills to Help You Get Along and Express Yourself. And Catherine, are there favorite places where people can track you down online and follow your work?
I have a website, which is catherinenewmanwriter.com, and everything is there, my books, and it's not very updated in terms of articles, but lots of stuff is there. And I love hearing from people, and I love hearing from kids. So if your kid ends up with this book in their hands and they have anything to share or anything they'd like to see different or covered in another book, I really, really hope they'll write me, because that's like my favorite thing.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. Congratulations. It's a day after your book birthday. So happy book birthday. And I'm so glad that you wrote this book and put it out into the world. And thanks for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me and for asking me such incredibly good questions.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To go deeper into this episode, visit the extensive show notes page. For every episode, there's a dedicated page on my website with links to all the resources mentioned, a full transcript, and a podcast player with key takeaways marked so you can easily go back and re-listen to the sections you're most interested in. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of the book Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting. This episode was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita, and show notes were put together by myself, Andrea, and Lindsay McFadden. If you get a lot out of this podcast and want to help cover the cost of its production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. On Patreon, you can sign up to make a small monthly contribution, as little as $2 a month, and it's super easy to sign up. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more, or click on the Patreon link on any show notes page. To follow Tilt Parenting on social media, go to @TiltParenting on Instagram and Twitter, and on Facebook. Lastly, please help this podcast stay visible and easily found by the listeners who need it by subscribing and leaving a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about this podcast or any of the resources that Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.